So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Dr. Sean McCormack here to talk about some of the work he's been doing in Ealing. I've been really lucky to work with Sean on the Beaver Project. I think it's absolutely fantastic what's been going on there. And I couldn't wait to get him to talk at the Ecology and Entomology AGM. So I twisted his arm and he's thankfully agreed to give up some of his time today to talk to us about harvest mice and beavers in Ealing. So Sean, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Kieran. Thanks for having me. It's quite tricky to condense the two big rodent projects we've been involved with into one talk, but I'll do my best and I will whiz through some slides and hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end. So where do we start? I think we start probably a common theme for a lot of people on this call is that how did I get into this? Well, when I was a kid, I was absolutely obsessed with natural history and wildlife in particular. And as many of you were, and I was asked as a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I always said either a zookeeper or a vet. And long story short, I became a zoo vet. And that's my day job. I'm a veterinarian. I kind of entered the traditional route as a vet and started my clinical life after graduating from UCD in Dublin as a domestic exotics and zoo vet. So down in Kent, we had 5 zoos on the books. I was seeing a variety of exotic species, and then moved up to London and became more heavily involved with domestic and exotic pets. So fairly traditional route, but I really valued and loved seeing, a variety of different species, particular interest in birds and reptiles. But I guess I got a bit disillusioned maybe with exotic pet ownership and, realizing that a lot of these species were not being kept in optimal conditions and were developing diseases of husbandry and nutrition. And I felt like I was really dealing with animal welfare and animal ethics on a sort of micro level in a consultation room with one animal at a time. And I got a bit burnt out and a bit jaded. And I decided to make a break and take a break from clinical life after about 6 years. And I think the one, if I had to pinpoint one thing that kind of spurred the kind of Ealing Wildlife Group, creation of Ealing Wildlife Group, it was that I bought a camera when I took this break from clinical vet life. And I started going out in Ealing and observing nature and taking pictures again and going back to what I truly was passionate about as a kid, which was getting out and exploring bugs and birds and creepy crawly things really. And while I was on that break, I went back to another passion of mine, which was garden design. So during my vet studies and during my undergrad degree in animal science at Agricultural College, a lot of my friends were gardeners, garden designers, horticulturalists, and I paid my way, really living expenses through vet school by being a gardener and a garden designer. And I set up a small business in Ealing to do some garden design work, just to take a complete break from vetting and get back to nature a bit and clear my head and see what I wanted to do next. And I made this wildlife pond for a client who later tagged me on Facebook because a journalist was asking about bats at the Hanwell Viaduct in Ealing. Was it true that there could be the largest colony of bats in the southeast of England, which was a strange and often confused Wikipedia entry about the viaduct. And I went down there and I got someone from London Bat Group to come and do a survey with me. And I asked on Facebook again, would anyone be interested in coming on a bat walk if I bought a bat detector? And the rest is history. That's how Ealing Wildlife Group was born. Over 400 people said they'd love to go on a bat walk that summer. So I basically set up a Facebook group to try and organize some bat walks in 2016. And that's how Ealing Wildlife Group was born. So we do a variety of different conservation projects, as Kieran said, very much kind of focus on traditional conservation with kind of umbrella species that we will target that will actually have biodiversity benefits for lots of other species as well. One of those is the barn owl. So we knew that we had barn owls frequenting some of our meadow habitats in Ealing and hunting there, but we didn't have any records of them breeding in recent times. We knew that they were in the neighbouring borough of Hillingdon in particular. So we decided with the ranger team, you see John and James there behind myself and Caroline, our vice chair at the time of Ealing Wildlife Group, we decided to apply for some funding and get out and erect barn owl boxes, as well as little owl and tawny owl boxes, but crucially not just putting up nest boxes for barn owls, actually adapting with the council some of our grassland management and turning over either entire fields or field margins to revert to rough grassland, to try and encourage small mammals like field voles to come back. And through that kind of hands-off approach, and some might say a bit of a rewilding approach of allowing kind of nature to take the lead and have less management, we started to develop fairly good habitat for another little species of rodent, which was the harvest mouse, which I've always been interested in. I am a self-confessed rodent nerd. My undergrad dissertation was on parasites in wood mice and bank voles, believe it or not. But yeah, I was quite interested in harvest mice as a species that I didn't have growing up in Ireland. A lot of our mammal fauna, in particular, terrestrial mammals, didn't make it over to Ireland before the last land bridge closed after the Ice Age retreated. So we're kind of an impoverished country in terms of terrestrial fauna, mammals in particular, and reptiles and amphibians, which I was very interested in. So I was quite fascinated with harvest mice and started digging around in local records. And I got wind of records from the Selborne Society, who have Perryville Wood in Ealing, that the last known record of harvest mice in Ealing was in 1979. We've since found another one for 1981 at Perryville Wood. And it was at this time we decided, or I decided, to launch an initiative called Rewilding Ealing. So starting to talk about our green spaces and the management of our green spaces and management of nature in more of a, again, self-willed kind of process-driven approach rather than, kind of manicuring and gardening and tinkering around the edges. And I decided I would float the idea of reintroducing harvest mice if they were indeed absent. So the first thing to do, and one of the reasons to reintroduce harvest mice was to do with the barn owl project. It was realizing that actually we've probably lost this species. It is a declining species nationwide. And it's a part of the food chain, a very important part of the food chain that we've probably lost through habitat fragmentation and degradation and all the usual reasons, tidying up and not leaving those messy margins that this species really thrives in. Isn't it our duty maybe to bring them back if we have suitable habitat again? So the three criteria really, well, actually I should say the first criteria was, did we have harvest mice? They're a cryptic species. We didn't know whether they still existed, whether they were still out there. One of the main ways to detect them is to do nest surveys in the wintertime when vegetation dies back. And I'll show you their nests in a little bit. But we got, the army of naturalists that we had built up in Ealing, luckily, out and about, keeping an eye on harvest mice. And we did this talk, which is available on our YouTube channel if you want to look at it, from a few years ago, to try and equip people with the skills to find harvest mouse nests. And no records came in. So the next phase really was then to map out where might be suitable habitat already for harvest mice to be reintroduced. Would those sites be sustainable, as in would their management continue, indefinitely, or at least for the long term, in a way that supported the maintenance and spread of harvest mice? And were those sites connected? So I identified 5 sites that were suitable. I had reassurance from the ranger team that if we were going to go ahead with this project, that they would be sustainable, as in harvest mouse habitat would be something borne in mind with the management of these sites. And then they needed to be connected. So you can see in the east of the borough, number 1 and 2, there's Horsenden Hill and Meadows and Paradise Fields. Number 3 in the middle is a place called Carr Road Reedbeds, and then number 4 and 5, Marnham Fields and Smith's Farm, all connected by the canal of the Grand Union, or sorry, the wildlife corridor of the Grand Union Canal. So we had very good habitat there. We had a mixture of rough grasslands, scrub emergence. We had wetland habitats as well, which harvest mice nationally seem to be clinging on best in, kind of reed bed habitats and marginal habitats around wetlands and marshlands. Harvest mice love, as I say, the messy margins. So areas where you get kind of scrub emergence or bramble woodland edge meeting long grass. Those are the kind of areas that harvest mice live in, and they live up in the stalk zone during the kind of spring and summer, autumn season, and they go to ground in winter. We've been doing a lot of small mammal surveys as part of our barn owl project there, finding various species, but not harvest mice. And Paradise Fields, some of you will be familiar with, and we'll talk about a lot later when we talk about the beavers, because that's where they are. And that had a lovely mix of grassland, meadow habitat, reed bed, and scrub emergence as well. Carr Road reed bed I had been to on for various reasons, but largely to try and see if we had any water voles left in Ealing. Another little rodent kind of project of mine. During COVID lockdown, I went and visited 5 sites in Ealing that had historic records of water voles to see if we had any left, and kind of realized that we may not have water voles left in Ealing, I think, but we certainly had good habitat for harvest mice. And that was kind of the seed of that idea, looking at places like Carr Road reed bed. Marnham Fields and Smith's Farm, very similar to each other, a lot of rough grassland and reed bed as well. So we cracked on and we convinced kind of our community that it was a good idea. We got buy-in from the council that this was a good idea to bring back this species. Some people are quite anti reintroduction, and some people will kind of poo-poo the idea of reintroducing harvest mice in particular and say, oh, they're probably out there anyway. And a few people said, you know, kind of if they're gone, you know, why are you putting them back? Maybe it's not suitable for them. But I was pretty convinced that, you know, we had suitable habitat again, that we didn't have maybe some time ago. And for the people who said they might be out there, you know, I kind of put it back to them and said, well, you know, you're traipsing around every green space in Ealing for the last number of decades. Have you seen a harvest mouse nest? And the universal verdict was no. So we crowdfunded and we asked people in Ealing to sponsor an Ealing harvest mouse for £10. And we raised, I think, £2,500 in the space of about 48 hours. So we had our initial seed money and we bought our initial stock of harvest mice, captive bred harvest mice from the Derek Gow consultancy in Devon. Started breeding our own harvest mice and releasing that summer in 2021. And then Heather from Calderglen Country Park in Scotland got in touch on social media, having seen some of what we were doing, and said that they had a captive breeding colony of harvest mice, but they had no outlet to deal with their excess stock of harvest mice. Would we like them to donate their excess stock for release? And we said, yeah, absolutely. So she came down with the first batch from Scotland. We call those the Glaswegian mice. They're quite feisty. There's definitely a difference between the Devon and the Glasgow mice. And we started putting those out and again mixing genetics and boosting the genetic diversity of our breeding stock. And then we had 2 more zoos get in touch, Battersea Children's Zoo, Battersea Park Children's Zoo, and their sister zoo, the New Forest Wildlife Park. They came on board the following year and had the same issue that they were breeding harvest mice for display, but they didn't have any kind of in situ conservation projects going on or reintroduction projects. So again, we welcome them with open arms, and they've been brilliant partners, especially on the education front as well for what we're doing. We've kind of changed and graduated in terms of our facilities, I suppose. We started in a very ramshackle little room in an old farm building at Horsenden Farm. And we have upscaled for sure. I'll show you on the next slide. But in 2023, we reached a milestone of 1,000 mice released, which was great. And then the crucial thing about the project is that it is volunteer led. There's an educational role. You can see top right there, the display, the original display house that we had at Horsenden Farm to teach people about these mice. But actually, these mice are emblems, and they're teaching a bigger picture about habitat management, suitability, you know, wider kind of food chain discussions, and biodiversity in general. And very crucially, because it was a crowd-funded and community-led project and funded project, we invited the community to come and help us with it. So release days are always very, very exciting, extremely engaging. And I think this is really, really important. We can all get into the kind of silos of traditional conservation and just kind of keep it to ourselves and sort of gatekeep wildlife and nature conservation, but actually putting people at the heart of what we do at Ealing Wildlife Group has always been our theme. And people come and we put the mice into people's hands of all ages and ask them to release their mouse. We can't guarantee that their mouse is still living. Some people do ask, is my mouse still okay? You know, but it's a really, really great way to engage new people. And what we found actually is it has brought in a range of people and members of the community that wouldn't maybe otherwise have come to a, you know, pond habitat management day for great crested newts, for example, or a bird walk and things like that. But cute, charismatic mammals definitely win a lot of energy and affection from the public. We continued in 2024, and we got some funding through the Mayor's Rewild London Fund in association with Perryvale Wood. And we got our all singing, all dancing new shiny Ecolab at Horsenden, and that's now our breeding room where we have our breeding colony. And we also got a new newly designed state-of-the-art display house at Horsenden Farm. So far the kind of rough tally you can see there is over nearly 2,500 mice released to date, which is phenomenal, really, when you think about it. Again, always partnering with our colleagues there, our friends at Battersea Park Children's Zoo. The other crucial part of the project, not just rearing mice in captivity and putting them out into the wild, is it worthwhile? Is it successful? Are we doing something good? Is it working? And you can see there in the top middle image, we have a team of volunteers out combing the meadows at Horsenden in the winter and doing the nest surveys that we did before the project started to determine presence or absence. And those nest surveys are super important because they are probably the only way without putting tiny radio collars on harvest mice, which actually has been done, believe it or not. That's the only way really to kind of monitor and establish kind of numbers in terms of population. So we go out and we comb the meadows and habitats for the little woven grass nests, which I'll show you in a second. This slide is very, very busy, but it's just a little bit of a timeline of what we've been doing. And the kind of take-home message on it is that our methodology is that we release at each site. So you can see there, Horsenden release H1. That's year 1 of Horsenden. And then you move to year 2 of Horsenden, H2, Paradise Fields year 1. What we do is we release in year 1 and 2 at each site. And then we have a non-release year. So it's 2 years of sustained releases. The masses of mice, largest numbers go out in year 1, top up in year 2. And we're talking hundreds. There's no point putting out, 6 mice here and 12 mice there and 10 mice again in a few weeks' time. You need to put out hundreds of mice in order that some of them do well and breed and get going, because the attrition rate and predation rate is inevitably very high. But we release for 2 years, and then we do a non-release year, and we survey each year. And last year we surveyed in Horsenden year 3, which was a non-release year, and very excited to say that we did find nests. So the mice persisted without releases. So that's an ongoing cycle that we're in. We're approaching now the end of our release years at our primary sites, and we're looking this winter, and we will be hoping some of you might come and volunteer and help with us to survey some new sites, which are in the north of the borough and into Hillingdon on some London Wildlife Trust sites as well. So that's just a little snapshot. This is what we're looking for when we're surveying. So harvest mice uniquely make these woven grass nests from living grass structures. So they need habitat that has closely knitted tall grass, bordering scrub and thorn in wetlands as well, but they have to have grass that's kind of densely kind of close together, and they will pull that grass in, and they won't sever it from the plant, but they will actually kind of start to strip it and split it and weave it all together. So you get these beautiful little grass nests that are extremely camouflaged in the summertime when all the grass is green, but in the wintertime when the grass dies back, the nests become more obvious. It still very much is a needle in a haystack job, and you can see on 2 of our sites there, Horsenden and Paradise Fields, we use What 3 Words to map each year where we're finding nests, and we're finding good numbers of nests, as you can see there. But it's definitely something that takes a bit of time to get your eye in. But once you find one, it's amazing how much you start finding them. We go out with volunteers, and it's always a hairy moment, especially in a non-release year, where we're really, really trying to find a nest. And suddenly someone's, arm goes up and I think I've got one. And then the rest of the afternoon, it's here's another one, here's another one. So once you get your eye in, it's good fun, and it's quite valuable work. So we'd love to see some of you on our nest surveys this winter. Phase 2 of the project is well underway now. As I said, the Rewilding London Fund from the Mayor of London has been applied for by Perryvale Wood for Harvest Mouse project there. where they've basically got some electric fencing to keep cattle off some of the margins, and they're allowing some of the margins to grow and kind of scrub up and revert to rough grassland without grazing. And they've put in new pond and wetland area there as well. You can see those kind of messy margins that harvest mice thrive in. And then this is just a quick video. Hopefully it will work volume wise.
Now take a look at this. Is the harvest mouse the smallest and maybe even the cutest of Britain's rodents? Well, earlier, 150 of them were released in West London, all part of a project to support the species which have been wiped out there. Ava Hayes has more.
Teeny tiny little mice. Now being released back into the wild. Make good choices. Today, around 150 harvest mice were returned to Perivale Wood in West London, thanks to some helping hands from volunteers.
Holding a mouse for like the second time in my life, it just jumped off like there was no care in the world. It made me feel good. They were very fluffy and, well, jumpy as well.
Well, this is actually the last place that harvest mice were seen before becoming locally extinct, but they are now back in the borough of Ealing for the first time in 45 years. The project is one of 22 rewilding initiatives across the capital.
Harvest mice are an incredible species, and they're a bit of a sort of a missing link in the food web. So releasing them here is going to provide an incredible food source for owls and other predators.
So far, more than 1,500 harvest mice have been released, and it's hoped projects like this mean they'll be around for many years to come.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Layla Hayes, BBC London.
So you can see we do put people at the heart of what we're doing. I think it's really important to, a way and a really valuable way to engage young people with nature as well. I certainly know that when I was a little boy, if I could release harvest mice into the wild, that would have been something that definitely stuck with me. So it's been really, really valuable and really rewarding in that sense. We have kind of teamed up with BIAZA, who are the British and Irish Association of Zoos and Aquariums. We presented on our project at their Harvest Mouse Working Group fairly recently, in association with the Mammal Society as well. What's next for the project is that we're looking at now, because we're winding down on phase 1 and phase 2 at Perivale Wood is underway, would we look at expanding into new sites? So as I say, this winter we're going to look at some new sites and see if we can find any harvest mouse nests and potentially look at a reintroduction in association with London Wildlife Trust as well and neighbouring borough of Hillingdon. I cannot forget, before I go on to beavers, that I don't do much or any of the harvest mouse husbandry anymore. I used to do a lot, but we've got an incredible team of volunteers who call themselves the Mouse Wives of Horsenden Farm, and there's our mouse husband Fred, who joins them as well. So Penny, Emma, Fred, Claire and Leslie doing an absolutely amazing job on breeding hundreds and hundreds of harvest mice. Okay, so from Britain's smallest native rodent to Britain's largest native rodent, the beaver. Some of you may have heard about the Ealing Beaver Project. It's a collaborative project between Ealing Wildlife Group, Citizen Zoo, Horsenden Farm and Ealing Council, and it's supported by Beaver Trust and Mayor of London. It's much bigger in many scales than the Harvest Mouse Project, but I joked when I launched the Harvest Mouse Project that we may one day move on to beavers and skip up from water voles to beavers. And a lot of people laughed, but we have done it. So just a quick introduction to beavers before I tell you about the project itself. Beavers were wiped out. We have 2 species of beaver in the world, and we have the Eurasian beaver, clues in the name, across Europe and Asia, and then the North American beaver. The European or Eurasian species is Castor fiber, and the North American is Castor canadensis. This map shows the former range of the Eurasian beaver in green, before we almost eradicated it, down to just 8 or 9 little remnant populations or relic populations in yellow. There was as few as 30 animals in the south of France remaining, but little isolated pockets of Eurasian beaver left. And the reason we almost eradicated them was their fur was very valuable. So it's part of the fur trade. We ate their meat. We used their scent glands, the castoreum glands as well. And there was an element of land drainage and kind of in North America, you know, they drain the swamp kind of mentality of making land productive, and beavers were getting in our way as well. So they're a very valuable animal, but sometimes a bit of a nuisance animal to some people as well. So we almost lost them from Europe, and then in the last kind of 50 to 100 years, a lot of European countries have been proactively bringing them back, realizing that actually they're a very important species and they're more valuable and important to us alive than dead. The little purple area there up in Finland is a kind of anomaly, and that is a population of Castor canadensis, the North American beaver, that was imported to Finland to try and restore the species for the fur trade. They didn't realize at the time that North American and Eurasian beavers were two separate species, different chromosome number, cannot interbreed. So there is this isolated population of North American beavers up there. They're the world's second largest rodent. The Eurasian species is slightly larger than the North American, so we win the second largest rodent. The largest rodent in the world is the South American capybara. But they're very much adapted to their aquatic conditions. You can see there the paddle-shaped tail, kind of scaly paddle-shaped tail as it's walking away from us. In certain times, and Christian and Catholic religions in particular, they used to treat beavers as fish because they had this scaly tail, and they'd say you could eat beavers on Lent and things like that because of that tail. They're mainly nocturnal, and to be more accurate, they're called crepuscular. So they'll come out kind of at dusk around time it's getting dark and go back to bed in the morning time when it's getting light again. So you can see them, especially on summer evenings, kind of coming out and starting their daily work. But they're often referred to as an ecosystem engineer. So they modify their environment, they build dams, they hold back water, and they create deep water refuge for themselves. So all of the benefits that you hear people talking about beavers bringing to us and to other species, they're not altruistic. They're not doing it for us. They're doing it for themselves. And what they're doing is, if they are feeling vulnerable, they're creating deep water refuge, ideally at least 1 meter or 1.5 meters deep. So that they can basically slink off if danger comes. And it's hardwired in their DNA that there could be a predator around every corner. Even in Britain, they still will, you know, be wary for things like lynx, wolves, bears, and people as well that would hunt them. So by building the dams and obstructing kind of shallow water flows, they create deep pools and really complex wetland habitats, and braided channels, and they reconnect rivers and streams with their floodplains, and they really build in a lot of resilience into the landscape, so they can be agents for mitigating flood issues. For example, some studies showing them decreasing the impacts of floods by up to 60%. And that's because they're holding back the flow. In our wisdom of managing our rivers and things, we've often canalized rivers and straightened them and taken the bends out and disconnected them from their floodplain, but that only causes problems downstream, especially in climate change times where we're getting more incredibly kind of large rainfall events, heavy rainfall events in short spaces of time, and huge amounts of flooding. Beavers are slowing the flow. They're dissipating the force of water laterally across the land. They're sinking water into the water table and elevating the water table in an area. And basically a beaver wetland acts as a giant sponge that can soak up high rainfall events and release them slowly. They're also improving water quality because each dam and the whole network that they create acts as a giant filtration mechanism. It's slowing down the flow of water, and solids, including pollutants and sediment, are settling out of the water column, and we're getting improved water clarity as well as quality. And then you have light entering the water where they're coppicing down vegetation on the water's edge. And where you have light and clear water, you get algal growth, and then you get zooplankton and various microinvertebrates and macroinvertebrates and everything else up the food chain that can thrive. So they create incredible complex wetlands that support a huge abundance of life. This kind of diagram here is from Rewilding Europe. So you'll see some European species that we're not yet lucky enough to have in Britain on a regular basis, like your black stork and things. But wherever you see beavers, it does turn into a bit of a kind of a strangely primeval kind of feeling landscape, but absolutely buzzing with life. The other important thing for kind of climate change resilience is that complex beaver wetlands capture a huge amount of carbon, and much more carbon, for example, than closed canopy woodland. So there's been lots of studies on that, and showing kind of really, really good benefits for some carbon sequestration. Preventing drought was something that I always thought, well, how can they mitigate for flooding and for drought? How does that work? Well, actually, in the summertime, where we're having more extreme dry weather, and a lot of our habitats are going bone dry very early in the season, beaver wetlands remain green because they have elevated the water table and stored more water on the land. And I'm just back, believe it or not, from BeaverCon, which exists. It's in Boulder, Colorado. And myself and Nadia, our ecologist, and our project filmmaker, Matt, went over a few weeks ago. And it was actually fascinating to see the number of beaver projects in the southern United States, where wildfires are a big problem, and they're trying to restore beavers to try and mitigate for drought, but also to act as fire breaks in the landscape, because beaver wetlands don't burn and they act as refugia for a lot of other wildlife when wildfires hit. So they really are an animal that is a keystone species. It has a magnified effect on its landscape, unlike any other species that we have native to Britain. Now, what about beavers in the urban landscape? So again, people laughed at us with the harvest mouse reintroduction. It's a small number, but they did. People also thought we were crazy to bring up, bringing beavers back to London. And there's this misconception, and I certainly had it growing up, poring over natural history books and pining over the amount of fauna and things that you had in Britain versus Ireland. And I was just absolutely fascinated with beavers, and couldn't believe that actually just 400 years ago, there were beavers in Britain just across the water from me growing up. And then in my undergrad degree, I went to Vancouver on a student or on an international study semester. And there was a place called Beaver Lake in downtown Vancouver in Stanley Park. And that was the kind of light bulb moment for me, that actually beavers are not this wilderness species that I grew up reading about in the wilds of Alaska and Russia and the fur trade. They were a species that were around us everywhere we lived, and that included towns and cities. And you can see the picture on the right there is a beaver lodge in Stanley Park in Vancouver. The picture on the left is a beaver out in broad daylight in Berlin. And they're also in Munich, they're in Perth in Scotland. This year you might have seen that a beaver family showed up, a wild beaver family showed up in Canterbury in Kent, and people were watching them on the river from the back of the Sainsbury's car park every summer evening. They seem to like supermarkets, because they're also a family of beavers behind the Asda delivery bay in Frome in Somerset. So beavers are showing up and are thriving alongside us in towns and cities all over the world. And that was one of the things we said to Natural England when we were applying for the license, that actually beavers are on their way back in Britain. They're in the wild. They will be coming back to Greater London in time. We don't know when, but they're on the outskirts. They're in Kent. They're in Oxfordshire to the west, and it's only a matter of time before they come back. This is Munich Airport. Myself and Elliot Newton from Citizen Zoo went with Derek Gow to Bavaria, where they started reintroducing beavers in 1956, and really learned from a lot of people, from government officials, water bodies, mayors, farmers, president of the Farmers Union. He said to us, don't fear the beaver, welcome the beaver back, and just learn to live alongside it. But this is in the grounds of Munich Airport as we waited for the rest of the group to arrive from the UK to Bavaria, and beautiful beaver wetland, buzzing with life, loads of dragonflies and damselflies and things flying around there, alive with the sound of frogs and insects and things. So they're all around. Some of the nerves and the kind of wariness about having beavers back alongside us where we live comes from a place of fear of the unknown, and we have lost our living memory of living alongside beavers. One of the main objections, or one of the main concerns that we heard when we started floating this idea and doing a public consultation about beavers in Ealing potentially, was, well, they're going to eat all the trees. We did get a few people saying, well, they're going to eat all the fish, and we had to clarify that beavers are exclusively herbivorous. They're vegetarian, they don't eat fish. Elliot from Citizen Zoo told me that the myth of beavers eating fish comes from The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, C.S. Lewis and Narnia, where he depicted mother and father beaver in the lodge frying a fish on a frying pan, and that's caused all manner of confusion. But beavers do eat trees, but they live in harmony with trees because all of our native trees that beavers feed on evolved alongside beavers. And actually what beavers do is they coppice trees. So they will fell trees, but most of the tree species that they fell will regenerate again from the stump left behind. But we can protect trees. So there's two ways that we can protect trees. One is by wrapping it in steel mesh, as you can see on the left, or the guy in the middle there is painting the tree up to about a meter and a half high with a gritty, sandy, non-toxic paint. The beaver's teeth are their livelihood, so they do not like to chew anything abrasive or hard that will damage their teeth and affect their ability to get on with what they do. If we lose beavers, that was another concern from Natural England mainly, that we might have a beaver escape into the urban landscape, and obviously that's an animal welfare issue, crossing roads and things like that, but also it might mean that, there's a unregulated release or escape population of beavers in time. But actually they're quite easy to find because of the signs they leave after them. And also they're quite easy to trap with apples or carrots. Beavers love apples, is what we've learned. The other concern people have is about flooding. So we do know that beavers will inundate areas with water. If you have just a shallow little stream, beavers can turn that into a pretty complex and pretty expansive wetland in a relatively short space of time. And one of the things that we had to kind of reassure people is there's lots of tried and tested ways of managing beaver dams, water levels, where beavers are damming and holding back water. In an urban landscape especially, that's something that we needed to learn. And that was one of the objectives of the project, is that we said beavers are going to come back into Greater London in time. There's 2, if not 3,000 beavers living wild and free in the UK now, not behind expensive enclosure licenses, out in the wild on various river catchments. But learning to live alongside them and learning some of these techniques and demonstrating them to reassure people that we can live alongside beavers. And there's very low tech and low cost solutions to managing beavers. These are, the one on the left here is a flow device called a pond leveler, sometimes called a beaver deceiver, that allows you to run a pipe through the dam and then a cage out into the beaver pond beyond, where beavers don't detect the flow of water. And it basically allows you to set the right level, so it's not coming up above like road infrastructure, for example, or flooding kind of footpaths or playing fields or anything else like that. So there's very low tech and easy solutions that are tried and tested that we can live alongside beavers again. So where did the idea come from? I told you I'm a rodent nerd. Around the time actually of the kind of concept of the harvest mouse reintroduction, as I said, I was out during the COVID lockdown, hour of exercise, if you all remember that period, surveying for water voles in Ealing. And the other COVID project that I set up because I was bored at home was I started a wildlife podcast, and I got Elliot Newton when lockdown lifted, got him to come to Paradise Fields, which was a site that used to have water voles, and talk about his water vole reintroduction project on the Hogs Mill in Kingston. And I said to Elliot at that time, I don't know if we would go for a water vole reintroduction in Ealing, because it just seemed like all of the kind of factors that have led to the water vole becoming the fastest declining mammal in Britain. It has got so many things up against it, especially in the urban landscape, with fragmentation of suitable habitat and degradation of habitat, and then the North American mink situation as well. I said, well, maybe actually we should climb that rodent ladder and think about beavers first, to do a lot of the habitat management of, overshading was one of the main issues that caused the unsuitability of the habitat at Paradise Fields. There was too many trees, no tree management, and the whole brook was overshaded. So the abundance of plant diversity was much reduced on the brook. And Elliot said, yeah, no, look, that is a good kind of concept. Beavers will create the kind of conditions that a lot of our struggling wetland creatures need. And the London Beaver Working Group was then set up by Citizen Zoo in association with Beaver Trust. And it basically asked nature stakeholders in London to come aboard a discussion forum and meet, 3 or 4 times a year to talk about the possibility, 2 things, the possibility of beavers coming back into Greater London and what should we be doing to prepare for that, What should we be doing to educate the public about beavers before they arrive? Should we be thinking ahead to the time where, you know, the first wild beaver is spotted in London? And the second question that we started to think about and ask is, was it feasible, or was there time and energy and resource, or even, you know, suitable locations to maybe proactively reintroduce beavers legally, using the legal framework of a fenced enclosure trial in the urban setting where we still had things to learn. There's lots of enclosure trials across England, I think between 40 and 50 licensed beaver enclosures now up and down the country. But maybe we could do something that was a little bit different and learn how to manage beavers in the urban setting. So it went ahead, well, at least some scoping visits went ahead, and Beaver Trust came down. So you've got Elliot from Citizen Zoo there, Dr. Roisin Campbell-Palmer in the middle from Beaver Trust, the head of Beaver Restoration, and Ben Stockwell from Citizen Zoo, and then Elliot, Josh, Ben, and Rob from Beaver Trust there as well. They came and they visited about 12 sites in London that had put themselves forward as potentially sites for a beaver reintroduction project. Ealing Wildlife Group and the ranger team from the council in Ealing put forward 2 sites, one being Paradise Fields, and Beaver Trust said that Paradise Fields was the most suitable habitat already existing for beavers that they had seen in London. So that was music to my ears, and we then cracked on with getting formal permission from the council, and start a public consultation and start thinking about the costs and logistics and whether we could do this. We're very lucky in Ealing Council that the head of parks team is a guy called Chris Welch, who is Canadian, and we said to him, Chris, we think we want to reintroduce beavers in Ealing, and he said, okay. So he was Canadian and all aboard the beaver train. That wasn't an issue at all. So we applied for the license after doing a public consultation, and we put forward 4 key objectives of the project. The first one was that we eliminated this keystone species, a native species, which has now since been afforded protected species status as well. And we should return them just for their own intrinsic value, and to right what we've done wrong in the past, and show how we can live alongside them again. The second one was to look at how they interacted with an urban river catchment, specifically around flood mitigation. And Paradise Fields was already earmarked for potential engineering works to try and alleviate flooding downstream. And we said to the parks team and Ealing Council, the beavers should be able to do this, get the same effect in a more cost-effective, sustainable, and potentially more effective way than expensive engineering works. We also wanted to look at the habitat changes and the biodiversity changes that happened with them on site, with a view maybe that if we did decide on a water vole reintroduction project, that the beavers may have created some ideal habitat as an initial receptor site for water vole reintroduction. And finally, and possibly most importantly, it was the public engagement of urban communities, and a lot of communities, you know, 83% of people in England live in towns and cities, and some of the most socially and economically deprived people have least access to nature. So we wanted to really engage urban communities with nature and rewilding and the restoration of this species that can do so much for the environment. So if you're not familiar with kind of Ealing Borough, Paradise Fields is up in the north of the borough, northwest. It's part of the Horsenden Hill complex, so our largest green space, and it's about 10 hectares of wetland, woodland, and meadow environment. We did some modelling with Beaver Trust and the University of Exeter on habitat suitability. And you can see the yellow is highly suitable, green is suitable, and then down to blue is unsuitable habitat. So we had a huge amount of very, very suitable habitat and a huge amount of tree cover that was actually, as I say, causing kind of detrimental effects on the wetland environment through overshading. One of the sticking points was that Natural England said we needed to get permission from local landowners or neighbours for going in and trapping a beaver if ever one escaped. And we said, how many local neighbours or landowners? And they said, how long is a piece of string, basically. So the application process was quite drawn out and long-winded, and the goalposts changed quite a lot. But we got around that sticking point by sending out emails to, I think, about 65 or 70 local landowners saying, we're having beavers come to visit nearby or live nearby, and if one does escape, we will be coming onto your property to get it back. if you have any problems with that, let us know. And no one got back to us. So we got around that one. The next thing we had to do was design an enclosure that allowed people in. So this is one of the crucial, unique points of our project. We didn't want to just do another beaver enclosure. We know what beavers do in enclosures. We know what beavers, how they behave. But this was unique because we wanted to let people in to see a beaver wetland emerge over time. So we decided very early on, instead of putting the beaver enclosure into Paradise Fields, we would make the whole, almost the whole of Paradise Fields, the enclosure. You can see in the bottom right of the image there, outside the red line, 2 hectares of the site isn't enclosed because it's unsuitable habitat and it's under a different management agreement. It's dry meadow habitat. But we made an 8-hectare enclosure out of almost the entirety of Paradise Fields. Part of the Capital Ring, circular route around London, does pass through the site. So we wanted to maintain that public access and welcome people in to see what beavers can do. Brings about its logistical challenges. We had to let people in basically through double kind of airlock gates, self-closing gates, without letting beavers out. So that was quite the challenge as well. The site has rewilded, so it was changed over from amenity grassland and sports fields use in the year 2000, and that lagoon that you can see, the main large water body there, was dug, and some reed beds were planted, and some scrapes and ponds and things were put into it to try and alleviate or kind of increase the water holding capacity and alleviate flooding in urban Greenford in the year 2000. And then the council stepped off it completely, and you can see how it has reverted. It's scrubbed up, and a lot of willow in particular has self-seeded in from the canal side and places surrounding. And it's become quite a diverse mosaic of habitats. But with that, having been in some would say neglected for 24 years or 23 years by the time the beavers came, there was a lot of historic litter. It was quite a hotspot for antisocial behavior. There was lots of little hiding places and camps and all sorts of things in there. So we went in with our army of volunteers and started cleaning up the place. And having a presence on site has done wonders, actually. And taking care of it and cleaning it up has really eliminated a lot of that antisocial behavior. We did want to involve the community, so we put up posters and we put a QR code to our consultation. We gathered people's concerns and opinions. Overwhelmingly, we had a huge amount of support, and we did have some concerns. Largely, they were about the welfare of the beavers. Was it suitable to put beavers into such an urban setting? Would the beavers be safe from dogs and people, for example? And we had to reassure them that actually everything a beaver family does is to create refuge from disturbance from potential predators. And they've been absolutely fine. I'm very happy to say we don't think we've had any kind of nuisance effects or people or dogs bothering the beavers so far. Baseline surveys were really important to us on the biodiversity front. We wanted to decide or find out what was there first. And thank you to Kieran, actually, in the Biological Recording Company, for coming along and doing a whole range of biodiversity surveys, from earthworms, surprise, surprise, Kieran, mollusks, botany field day, invertebrates, aquatic and terrestrial, bioacoustic surveys we did with an outfit called Carbon Rewild to look for bird and bat records, camera trapping as well on site. So we had a huge kind of effort in 2023 before the beavers arrived to try and map and record what was living there pre-beaver release. And then along came the release day. So I'll just play you the start of this video to show you the exciting day the beavers arrived.
I'm at Paradise Fields in Ealing in West London, where 5 beavers have just been introduced to the wild. They've just been released into this lake by the Mayor, Sadiq Khan, and wildlife enthusiasts. I've got to say, particularly after the week we've had, what a great day. You can't but smile when you see these beavers swimming around, and I had the pleasure of releasing 2 kits, and it's gorgeous. I mean, they've come from Scotland. Some good things do come from Scotland, Ross, and it's great because they're going to improve this community. They're the cheapest way of building dams. They build canals. They help with the ecosystem. They're going to help us as well. Do you know why? Because, you know, we as a city for too long have been de-wilding our city. I'm going to rewild our city. More greenery, more beavers. We've also got plans for bees and bats and waterfowls, and it's really important we do that.
One of the things they don't have yet is a name. Do you think these?
I'll stop it there. Cheeky little mention of Scotland for Sadiq. But yeah, it was a really exciting day. We had a huge amount of press there, an incredible amount of press interest. The story kind of went all around the world. CNN syndicated it, and we had people getting in touch from Australia and the Philippines and all sorts of places, very excited that this had happened. So I think it was really important, to be kind of putting beavers on the urban map. There's been a lot of reintroductions up and down the country, tends to be on, private country estates or national parks and very wild places. But it hadn't really been done in such an urban setting and with public access. We're very supportive of the Enfield Beaver Project, which were the first London beaver reintroduction, but we would set ourselves apart from them in some ways because that is quite a rural site and it's off limits to the public, and it's a totally different kind of ball game. It's not allowing people to come in and see, and it's certainly not next to a busy retail park. Plymouth were probably the first urban beaver reintroduction, again on the outskirts of Plymouth in a green space next to an industrial area. But afterwards, the beavers got cracking straight away. The site was closed for 1 month to allow them to settle in. The middle picture there is day one of beavers, so after release day, where I saw the first feeding signs and was pinching myself that we actually had beavers at Paradise Fields. But we again had an army of volunteers basically helping out and going and doing daily fence patrols, doing all the monitoring of our camera trapping. The first month I kept that on just to make sure that all the beavers were okay and their welfare was all right. Within about 2 weeks of them arriving, we had a very high rainfall event, and they had built a dam, a small dam in that time. It appeared within 2 or 3 days, just crisscross of sticks across the brook, and then within about 3 or 4 days it was holding back water. But the dams are very dynamic structures. We had a wash through with high rainfall, and then they repaired it overnight and had it holding back metric tons of water within a day or two of those high rainfall events again. Since then, there's about 7 functional dams in the system, and some new ones appearing here and there as well. One of the kind of anecdotal I guess proof of concept moments was when we had another high rainfall event in December. So we had 2 big storms in October 2023, if you remember back that far. But then we had huge amounts of water coming out, flooding the retail park, flooding downstream in urban Greenford before the beavers had a chance really to do their work. And then by December, this manhole in particular in the retail park, which had been gushing out as a kind of fountain or geyser in October, was actually just trickling out because they'd built 5 dams by then and they were holding back a huge amount of water. And 2 weeks before we went to BeaverCon, so about 6 weeks ago now, we had again 2 nights of very, very heavy rain. And we had areas upstream and uphill of Paradise Fields in Greenford where the streets were flooding through the kind of sewer network and drainage network. But the target area that we said the beavers would affect around Greenford Station and surrounding residential streets didn't flood. So that was kind of proof of concept again that the beavers were having the desired effect. In terms of the trees, we have seen some large trees coming down. We've seen them regenerating from the base again. And we've actually planted Britain's rarest native tree, 10 rare genetic clones of native black poplar, and protected those to show that actually, there's very easy solutions to having beavers living alongside trees that we want to protect from them as well. And we've had a huge number of tours and groups coming along. We'd be very happy to show you guys around if you wanted to arrange a little field trip. But you can see that first dam that I showed you the 3-day pictures of, that's it some months later. So pretty significant amount of material gone into it, and it's holding back even more water now. When the water flow is low and we can stand downstream of that dam, it's about 5 feet tall now, which is amazing. Loads and loads of tours happening, lodges appearing, kind of visibly. There's a lodge there in the bottom right that you can see from the road if you know where you're looking in the wintertime when the vegetation is down. Possibly one of the most urban beaver lodges in Britain. And the chap in the middle there with myself and Elliot on the bottom is Matt Brierley, who is a filmmaker. We got some funding from Consano Earth to produce a documentary called Beavers in Paradise. Once the beavers were settled, we put in interpretive signage, which includes QR codes, and we have fixed point photography to monitor habitat changes over time, and some activities for kids and things as well. All done by volunteers. So we've got an incredible volunteer team, basically doing the bulk of the work. And I'm managing, as the project license holder on the license, we're managing the project through WhatsApp and various subgroups of volunteers. This is from last week. So in wintertime, beavers will feed more heavily on bark and from trees. So they have taken down, you know, pretty significant sized trees in the last few weeks as a kind of a winter larder or food source. And this is their most recent lodge as well, which I just love the kind of contrast between a beaver lodge and then a high-rise housing building in the background. You know, urban beaver lodge right here in Greenford and Ealing. And you can see they are digging canals as well out into some of the wetland habitat to transport material back over water rather than over ground. So what are our measures of success? I'm conscious of time. I do want to open to questions, but we've had a dramatic reduction in flooding downstream, 7 to 8 functional dams in the system right now. Drought mitigation, you know, we did see during the summer just gone that the whole of Paradise Fields was a lot greener than the area of kind of Horsenden and Meadows across the canal. Water quality improvements massively. The clarity has improved and we're getting species coming in like kingfishers, which we weren't seeing very often because the brook was described actually by ZSL London Zoo when they did their invertebrates surveys as an ecological dead zone. It was very poor. It only had very pollution and stagnant conditions, species that were tolerant to pollution, higher pollution and stagnation than some others, more sensitive species. And what we've seen by monitoring water coming into the site and water where it's leaving is over 50% reduction on average month on month in nitrate and phosphate levels, and a reduction in total dissolved solids, and the clarity of the water improving as well. A massive boom, like noticeable boom in the abundance and diversity of aquatic invertebrates, which obviously are the base of the food chain for lots of other things. And we've had new bat records on site. We're getting regular Dub Benton's bats now using the site, which we hadn't detected in the previous 7 years on site. We had huge numbers of swifts feeding over the lagoon when we were doing our beaver safaris in the evenings. And we've had 2 new bird records in the space of a few days, just a couple of months ago, water rail and snipe, which I'd never seen or detected on site through our acoustic surveys for water rail as well. The public reaction has been incredibly positive. People are really, really happy, it seems, to have beavers as neighbours in Greenford. And then the proof of concept with the beavers being happy, I'll just play you a short bit of this clip as well. We had some exciting news this summer.
Beavers are reproducing in London. At least 2 babies, or kits as they're called, were born at a site in Greenford in West London after the mammals were introduced last year. Our environment correspondent Tom Edwards can tell us more.
This is a mother beaver and her new baby, or kit as they're called, in the water at Paradise Fields in Greenford in West London. Caught on remote trail cameras, volunteers here think there have been at least 2 additions to the Ealing Beaver family. Here a kit can be seen feeding. Beavers only come out at dawn and dusk. Here is the kit captured just before dark.
Okay, I'll stop it there. And yeah, we've had a huge kind of interest in it. We're in a bit of a funding gap now. It was quite easy in some ways to get funding to launch the project, but for the ongoing costs and staffing of the project, we've had kind of issues securing funding. But the main revenue source for the project now, it's wiping its own face and supporting itself, is ecotourism revenue. So we're bringing people on site and doing walking tours during the day, and during the summer months from kind of June to the end of September, we were doing evening beaver watching safaris and seeing scenes like this of, you know, baby beaver kit playing with its older sibling or potentially parent there, I think older sibling. We started with 5, we've now got 7. We are, this question will probably come up, but we are going to start trapping in the next couple of weeks, and we're taking out the eldest daughter, so the 2022 young adolescent beaver. We're taking her out and bringing her to a project in Wales that has a lonely bachelor beaver looking for a mate. So there is a little bit of management involved when you do have a family of beavers behind an enclosure. If you want to look at our document